I'd like to welcome everybody back to the final hour of our Pentagon discussion at the three-day Turning the Tide conference. And now what we're going to do in this final hour, going to get a little bit of space to Wayne Costi, just 5 minutes for him to talk generally about issues which he wants to alert the wider public to. And then we're going to have Niels Harrit he's going to talk for 10 minutes. Again, raising some broader issues and ideas, which I think are going to be useful for the wider audience out there. And then I think we have quite a few questions from the audience, and I imagine that will probably take us up to time. So without further ado, and I will emphasize at this point, what we're going to do, apart from when Niels gives his 10-minute talk, everyone's going to remain seated and they'll be using their mics next to their seats. So without further ado, Wayne, would you like to come up and just talk just for 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Niels Harrit for a 10-minute talk. Must be sitting down. I prefer you sitting down.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate the chance to go over many of the important things that I have researched. And I want to also say that this is going to be my chance to embarrass myself in front of all of you by saying things that you can't believe is going to come out of someone who's a 9/11 truther, right? So let's begin. The analysis that I have started to do in the last 8 months has led me into the need to look at the flight data recorders. The flight data recorders are, of course, suspect. People say, oh, it comes from the government. So I've taken a look at them, and I've kind of prepared a paper in a presentation that Colorado 9/11 Truth, go to colorado911truth.org, has presented. And what it basically goes through is the evidence from manual control of flight AA-77, flight 93, and by extension 175. But the flight data recorder for 77, which is the topic here, is, in my opinion, absolutely authentic. And that is a problem for the 9/11 Truth movement, as I know it is configured out in here. So let me tell you why I have come to this conclusion. When I was up here a few moments ago, I went through the physical damage that was not part of the government supplied data, the generator, the impact in the generator trailer, the flap track fairing, a scar on the top of the trailer, which establishes the lateral horizontal position, the hitting of the retaining wall by the engine, which keeps the wing low, the knocking down of, or knocking away like a croquet ball, wire spool number 7, hitting number 4, knocking both of those out of the way, but leaving 5 and 6 in place. The left wing hitting the wall at column 9AA, bending and bowing it, having the tail hit between columns 12 and 13, knocking down the beam and letting the bricks, infill bricks, fall away, and the top of the plane impacting just so that the top of the fuselage is what is actually impacting the lower part of the column 14 that is still hanging and pushed in the direction of the impacting plane. And on the right-hand side, where the limestone concrete, or the limestone that protected the concrete at the intersection of floor in column 18, column 19 is bent in, and column 20 has got the limestone knocked off. So all of that is the physical evidence, and the flight data recorder records this in fidelity. I've got a paper on 911speakout.org, Wayne Costi collection. You can go see it. You can watch the video that I gave last Thursday. The reason this is so important is that the NTSB technicians could not have put this in a January 2002 FDR release. January 2002, no one knew much about 9/11. There certainly was no 9/11 movement to try to discourage. And nobody, the ASCE reports, nobody talked about this yaw rotation, the right engine hitting the trailer and creating a yaw, a sideways rotation. Nobody knew about this. The ASC, the Purdue simulation study doesn't, it just shows go right in. Nothing about a generator trailer, nothing about a yaw rotation, nothing. There is no discussion anywhere until I did the dynamic analysis and showed that this was what was happening. And thank you very much. Craig used to be my foil on the 9/11 monthly deep state conference calls. And he would ask me all these questions and send me back to do homework because he told me I was wrong. No, it wasn't. Well, maybe it was, but I figured it out. With all these dynamics, it's figured out finally in 2017. It's not something that anyone talked about, as I said, in official circles, in the 9/11 circles, and Warren Stutt had decoded the last 4 seconds, and those last 4 seconds have all this data in it. So it cannot be a faked FDR. It is absolutely authentic, and it proves manual control. And after the hijacking, there's the horizontal stabilizers that move slightly after the hijacking, suggesting weight shifting to the back.
Wayne, we're at time. So thank you for making your case. That was a lot of information, strong case.
Thank you. Niels is just going to talk, because he has to talk from his notes, but he's going to just talk for 10 minutes, and then we have some further questions from the audience.
I'm not going to address any specific speakers in particularly, but rather outline the general principles or conditions for having a discussion like this and in general. Because the situation after 9/11 very much resembled the situation after the killing of President J.F. Kennedy and the Warren Report, which came out in 1965. And the theory that Lee Harvey Oswald had killed Kennedy started cracking, and everybody felt that there was something wrong. And they started to attack the Warren Report. And eventually, as some of you may know, CIA activated the Mockingbird network and labeled everybody, putting all skeptics were labeled conspiracy theories from that on. Very much the same thing after 9/11, the years following the Pentagon and the World Trade Center attacks. People start saying, hey, there's something wrong here. And actually, up until maybe 2004, it was consensus, or in the not yet 9/11 truth movement, that there was no airliner hitting the Pentagon. We have heard that Thierry Masson came with this book, Pentagate, in 2002, maybe started all of this. Maybe something believed this because they wanted to believe it, or maybe they had looked at the evidence. Up until 2004, when something happened, which I think is very, very important, and that was a publication by Jim Hoffman, which was called No 757 Crash Theory, Booby Trap for the 9/11 Skeptics. And in that one, he warned the truthers, say, hey, maybe the government is deliberately providing false and sloppy data, contradicting data out there to make us actually believe that there was no 757 there. Okay, that is the trap for the boobies. So I will read a quote from his paper. Quote, this is exactly the conflict that the engineered crash, that's what he's suggesting, that the crash is engineered to fool us all. This is exactly the conflict that the engineered crash may have been designed to create. Experts in psychological operations, the perpetrators, could have anticipated that skeptics would divide into two groups. These those persuaded by eyewitnesses' evidence that a 757 had crashed, and those persuaded by physical evidence that one had not. The ongoing controversies could then be exploited by the perpetrators to several ends. 1, to keep the skeptics divided. 2, to divert skeptics' resources from other more productive lines of inquiry. 3rd, to provide a bizarre-sounding theory with which to tar the entire 9/11 truth movement. In other words, he fancied that someday they will produce the Boeing up out on the lawn and everybody would be embarrassed and discredited. Further quote, if you accept the premise that the crash of 757 was engineered to create seemingly contradictory bodies of evidence in order to see truth-obfuscating conflicts, it's easy to explain crash site anomalies beyond the facade impact imprint. Okay, Hoffman followed up in 2006 with a paper called The Pentagon Attack, where he actually applied the booby trap scenario on all the physical evidence on the attack. And I'll quote from that same picture. This behavior, and he's talking about the government here, this behavior is consistent with 3 different motives on the parts of those responsible for suppression and destruction of evidence. 1, an institutional penchant for secrecy amplified by the atmosphere of national emergency produced by the attack. Like we heard yesterday, that we lie about everything, so why don't we lie about this? Now the next one, and that is interesting, a desire to suppress evidence that would disprove the crash of Flight 77, and a desire to suppress evidence that would prove the crash of Flight 77. That is the booby trap that Jim Hoffman is suggesting here. Now I'll give just a few notes on the concept of paradigms. Paradigms are very important in science. It is the unspoken set of concepts, convictions, traditions, procedures, and routines which define a science or a field. It is the paradigm which distinguishes a biologist from a geologist, and subfields have different paradigms, say analytical chemistry, organic chemistry, photochemistry, and nanoscience. The paradigm of a scientific field, unconscious as it usually is important because you cannot think outside the paradigm. Like the judges in the trial against Galileo lived with the paradigm that the universe revolves around St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. They were unable to fathom that a better and therefore more true model would be to put the sun in the center. When you select the data and consider the data, that is about paradigms. It's a property of paradigms. When you consider the data and select the data, only data and conclusions within the paradigm are available to your mind. The paradigm determines how you obtain, select, evaluate, and discuss the observations. The paradigm comes before the observations. In science, there can be no discussion unless you agree on the data. So consensus is impossible among persons operate within different paradigms. Within a given field, each person can only operate within one paradigm. Now, the booby trap scenario is such a paradigm. The booby trap paradigm implies that somebody prior to 9/11 anticipated the rise of a truth movement and decided prior to 9/11 to fake a cover-up. They planned a false flag cover-up. They planned to aggressively suppress information which supported the official story that a Boeing hit the Pentagon. They planned that no pictures of the plane were to be released. All external video recordings should be confiscated. They planned that remaining fuselage should be removed immediately from the lawn by office staffers, etc. In other words, they planned to deliberately kill their own story, to deliberately destroy their own credibility. They acted as if they had something to hide when they didn't have anything to hide, providing Boeing really did hit the Pentagon, of course. All these precautions were planned prior to 9/11, aimed at a non-existing 9/11 truth movement, which was anticipated to emerge 5 years later. It is inherent in the booby trap paradigm that a Boeing did hit the Pentagon. If a Boeing did not hit the Pentagon, there is no trap. If you believe in the booby trap, you believe the Boeing hit the Pentagon. Implications of the booby trap paradigm. Nobody wants to be trapped. So when you see a trap, you try to avoid it. We can avoid the booby trap by accepting the official story, by accepting that a Boeing hit the Pentagon. So instead of believing what we see what we believe. It goes like this, aha. The perpetrators tried to fool me into not believing them, but I ain't no fool, I trust them. This was the psychological setting being established in Hoffman's booby trap article. It was later exploited to stretch, squeeze, and cherry-pick data to reason away the obvious. It doesn't make sense at all. Rather, I suggest the straight-ahead paradigm. I believe the people who act as if they have something to hide do have something to hide. I believe that the perpetrators did what they could to render probable that a Boeing hit the Pentagon and failed. I believe that they would have released video footage showing the Boeing if they had had any. I believe that they would have reconstructed the Boeing from the wreckage and put it on display if there had been a Boeing to reconstruct. I believe that the perpetrators are the strongest witnesses against the perpetrators. And now a note on the scientific method. In science, a theory can be right 1,000 times, but it is wrong only once. It cannot be wrong twice. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Like if an accused murderer has an alibi, he is innocent. You cannot be innocent twice. So if there's one single observation which cannot be explained by the theory, it is wrong. To me, the picture shown below, or shown many times today, like Sanders showed very early in his presentation, the one you've seen several times about the impact hole in the morning, that picture, to me, is such an observation, and it is not from a government source. Maybe somebody can see a Boeing in there. I can't. You cannot squeeze an elephant into a mouth hole. Thank you.
Would you like to say anything in response, or any of the panelists, or should we leave a very clear presentation there from Niels about his thoughts about some of these issues? No, I was just checking if David or Wayne wanted to say anything. We do have quite a lot of questions from the audience, and I do want to make sure that we give space for that before we run through some final wrapping up questions with all of you. 30 seconds. No, don't stand up. Just use your mic there. Have you got to put down? No, remain seated now. They don't need to keep getting up.
Oh, yes. How's that? Okay. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. I wasn't sure where it was going to go at first, but it's just interesting to me and interesting to point out that Jim Hoffman, he's the one that writes this article, and Jim Hoffman, since then, has been part of the plane hit the Pentagon group and has been involved in that. So it's sort of interesting that he would write an article like that. It almost suggests he would stay out of the debate, and yet he had.
I would like to thank Niels Harrit, by the way, for coming all the way from Copenhagen. Thank you, Niels. Thank you for what you said.
We'll leave applause to the end. We want to stay focused on
Yeah.
responses.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on what Niels said. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone heard, if I understand correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, Niels, but I think I heard you say that you also believe that that photograph that shows at least, part of the column 14 on the second floor and only about 50, maximum 60 continuous opening, that is kind of your stake in the ground too. I appreciate that. I needed to hear that. And I also wanted to mention about Jim Hoffman. When Jim Hoffman, as Craig just said, when Jim Hoffman, who was a very early analyst of the Pentagon, he finally came to his bottom line of the last paper that he did. He could not say for sure that it was 77. He did believe that it was a 757, but he couldn't say it was 77, which I think that is the critical issue.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Anybody else? David, please.
Just on that last individual point, whether it was a 77 or not depends on two pieces of evidence that make that transition. One is the DNA evidence from the Pentagon, and the other is the flight data recorder for Flight 77. So those are the two that tie it directly to that flight. So that's where you have, excuse me, on the radar as well. So the radar with the flight data recorder and the DNA, those are where you have to look in terms of establishing whether or not it was Flight 77.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the audience?
All right. It says 9/11 had 3 attack parts: the towers in New York, PA, Shanksville, and the Pentagon. The towers and Shanksville used passenger planes with passengers as the weapons. If the plane at the Pentagon did not crash into the Pentagon, that seems odd and inconsistent and violates the consistency in design. Basically, I guess the question is, does it seem odd that they would use one system for 2 of the crash sites and a different one in the third?
I'll jump in just real fast to say that, I mean, aircraft were used in all 3 scenarios, but delving into the explicit aircraft utilized in New York is well beyond the scope of today's presentation. I think the Northwoods documents themselves talk about the many different ways in which aircraft could be utilized to create confusion, fog of war, swapping tail numbers, utilizing drones, overlying radar tracks. All of these things are achievable.
Wayne just put his hand up.
Yep.
So Wayne was first, but.
Okay, sure.
I'll let you go.
Okay. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because I hear this a lot. People say, well, if they did, in fact, people who don't believe there were planes used at the towers will often say, well, I don't think there were planes used anywhere. And my response is, without getting into that question, my response is always, don't lump them together. Look at each one on their merits. Look at the evidence for each one. Don't lump it all and say, well, it's all this or it's all that. And I think, first of all, we should not assume or even think that the perpetrators of this event would be consistent. Why would we think they would be consistent? Their whole point is to deceive us and to create an event that's going to have us, get us caught in a booby trap, as Niels was saying. So the idea that they would be inconsistent doesn't bother me at all. I think it's entirely understandable that they would be.
Thank you, Craig. Wayne.
Answering the question, why would they would you do something different? You're right, it doesn't make any sense. As we take a look at the 28 pages and that Barbara was so instrumental in getting released, I think it is imperative that there was a move through the higher powers, as illustrated in the 28 pages, to get hijackers, to nurture people and to fund them. And I don't know about the training and all that stuff, but the 28 pages is absolutely critical to setting up the stage for something to be done in a certain manner. And it seems like that certain manner would be just as we saw in the flight data recorders for 93 and 77, absolutely illustrate the validity of that for those two flights. But of course, there are no FDRs for the 11 and 175. So, over.
Okay, Barbara.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It really is. I think that it is interesting that most people in the 9/11 Truth Movement before my work were not even looking at the possibility of pre-placed explosives at the Pentagon. And that was the pioneering contribution that I first made to the movement. And anyone who would like to read all that evidence, it is in my chapter 13 in the Toronto 9/11 report, which is the document of all of us speakers at the 10th anniversary Toronto hearings. And it's also on the website of the International Center for 9/11 Justice, which is one of the sponsors of this event. So I hope you read it. I find it interesting that we now know that at the beginning, everyone wasn't supposed to believe from the public. The government didn't want you to think there were pre-placed explosives. They still don't at the World Trade Center. And I find it fascinating that it took so long for almost everybody in the movement to frankly come around to my evidence that and it's all in behind the smoke curtain. It goes on for over an hour. That there were pre-placed explosives at the Pentagon, that there were shaped charges put on the wall to make the Seahole exit, that we have an expert on shaped charge explosives saying that the so-called first floor opening, continuous opening, was the result of a massive explosion on the inside with the pressure wave going out. That the columns, the ones that are still there that you can see that are damaged, are bent out. Mr. Costi and Chandler and myself and Craig McKee and others simply cannot agree on whether those columns were bent in and out. There has to be some, we're on quicksand unless, I believe it was Neil said, we can agree on the data. So I think a very important thing for the movement to do is to have every single person who's serious about the Pentagon and anything else, but especially the Pentagon, is to write down their 1, 2, or 3, just a few of their absolute certainties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 2 questions from the audience, and one is directed more towards Craig, Barbara, Niels, and Xander, and one is directed more towards Wayne and David. So I'll start with this group first. Now, this is a involved question, so there are multiple parts to it. And if you want to address a specific part of it, that is up to you. However, consider taking this as a whole question. So there are 7 parts to this. 7. I'll count them off. Is it the position for those who don't believe a large plane hit that 1, an agent chopped a curved shape in the tree, 2, an agent placed the 5 light poles, 3, an agent took a hammer to the low wall to make the semicircle cut, 4, Lloyd England wrecked his cab to support the official story, 5, the generator was moved by explosives toward the Pentagon. 6, agents planted plane parts. And 7, the C-ring hole was cut with explosives. all at the same time and all in line with the flight path. Everything was faked?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on this. So one important feature of the event is that things that appear to have occurred linearly in space do not mean that they occurred linearly in time, meaning the breach on the C-ring could have happened first. It could have happened concurrently with explosives on the E-ring. Yes, all of that is feasible. The Highway 27 caravan of USA Today witnesses and others, I mean, it's a limited number. Traffic was stopped. So that is an elevated position. Nobody else in the area could see the lawn, and we don't have imagery of that lawn before the explosive event. So we don't know what may or may not have been put into position before the theatrical effects. With respect to the generator, yes, the contention would be it was not moved by impact with the large kinetic impactor, but rather moved or pushed offline, and then some sort of explosive event occurring there. I'm going to steer away from Lloyd. There's some discussion on whether or not he was in a different location and other things, and it's complex. But absolutely, could a team of operatives have planted those light poles? Yes, I think that by implication is what would have indeed happened if no jet flew through that area. And the tree, as I mentioned in my presentation, I'm personally not convinced that that is even the sign of a turbine blade or otherwise. I think we need to analyze what that tree was and maybe take a really close look at it. So over and out.
Okay, yeah, I'm so glad for that question. I'm going to focus in on one of the first things that Xander said. And the assumption in that entire question, I'm so glad it was asked, is that at the end he said, and it all happened at the same time. I actually was considering calling my presentation, "The Pentagon attack is not a unitary event in either space or time." And especially if you please get one of my behind the smoke curtains, you will see that there is at least a 20-minute segment on how the times that everyone thinks everything happened at the same time, we can prove the times that they did happen, and they're all over an arc of about 7 minutes. For instance, we absolutely know that the big smoke cloud, which everybody who supports the official story assumes was the result of a plane impact or some consequence from it, we know the precise time of that, 9:34 and 10 seconds. It's in smoke curtain. But anyway, we know that the massive explosion event by the helipad stopped the heliport clock at 9:32 and 30 seconds. We know that April Gallup inside the Pentagon, kind of just inside the window, literally behind the back of Alan Wallace's truck, that the massive explosion that killed most of the people around her stopped her wristwatch at 9:30. So we've got an explosion inside at 9:30. We have a plane coming in, and it was a real plane with real wreckage at 9:32 and 30 seconds. And we don't have the generator starting the big smoke cloud until 9:34 and 10 seconds. And I could go on, but I have a whole section on the fact that the times of these events are on a huge spectrum of time.
Yeah, the short answer to the question would be yes, I do. I do think all of those things could easily be faked. Well, easily. They could all be faked. I would say that the tree issue, to me, is just completely without value. I think Xander handled that very well in his presentation. There's just no way you can use one photograph of a tree and that appears to have a branch that's, I don't know if you'd even say missing, but to sort of conclude that must have been sliced off by an airplane engine. I think that's not even, I don't know if they faked that or not, or whether they needed to. Light poles, absolutely. I mean, I showed in my presentation a scratch that goes right across the road and ends right at the heavy corner of the light pole. So that would have been the one you would have most likely dragged if you were dragging it, although it might have been smarter to pick it up. But anyway, so the light poles for sure. Mentioned the low wall. That thing you saw in the photograph, it does look like a sort of a gouge out of this concrete, very short concrete retaining wall. But I mean, how do you know when that was made? How could anyone know when that was made? And how could witnesses, isn't it convenient that there are witnesses that claim they saw that get hit? Now, I showed you that rocket sled video, again, in my presentation for the purpose of showing you just how fast that actually is. And the idea that somebody could see that go by and see it hit a building, and at the same time see the engine gouge this thing right at grass level is just so absurd, I think. And plane parts, I mean, that would be so easy. I mean, there's not 90 tons of plane parts anywhere. There are parts that look like they came from a plane, and perhaps they came from a 757 originally, but there's not a 90-ton jet there. So that would be, I can't even imagine how, yeah. And as far as the C-ring goes, I'll leave that, Xander, and I think it was Xander's presentation, did a good job on that one. So I'm going to leave that there and just say, yeah, I don't think it's beyond the capability of the U.S. government to handle these things.
Okay, thank you all. Well, we have a question specifically for you, because that one was for the people who believe that no plane impacted the Pentagon. But this one is directed towards you, and I can't imagine you have not been asked this already online and in person, and so this will give you a chance to publicly clarify your position on this rather pointed question. So please don't take this out on the messenger. But this is the way it's worded. Why do you focus more on proving that the official Pentagon story is correct than proving that it's wrong?
That's not what we're doing. We're looking at what the evidence shows actually happened. And what we're doing is trying to understand in as coherent a way as possible how all this evidence hangs together. What we just saw was a litany of all these different events as though they were separately engineered, faked events, rather than a single event, which is the plane coming in, causing all this various kinds of damage as an organic whole. You ever heard of Occam's razor? You know, if you can understand the whole scene as an organic outcome of a single event, that has a much greater ring of truth to it than trying to say, well, how could they have done this? And how could they have gouged the tree? How could they have done this and this and this? So those are just ad hoc arguments about individual little pieces of the evidence. So I think in terms of coherence of the evidence, following the evidence, and I think it's important at the World Trade Center, the reason AE architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth made so much progress is they had a coherent explanation for what was going on, and they had a scientifically rigorous process, and they weeded out all the stuff that was fantasy stuff, like holograms and things. I mean, okay, maybe there's some, this doesn't fit my understanding of a hologram, but the idea that they're going to fool all these people somehow didn't seem like a coherent explanation. At the Pentagon, trying to come up with they faked all the evidence doesn't seem like a good explanation. I think if we're going to be believed by the population at large, we need to have an understanding of the events that makes sense. And by having something that follows the evidence, yeah, there's overlap with what the government's saying, but there's also things that are different from what the government's saying. As I pointed out at the end of my talk, yeah, there were planes with people in them that hit the Pentagon. Well, I mean, the planes with people in it hit each of the buildings and went down in Pennsylvania. So how is that all of a sudden something to argue about at the Pentagon? It seems like that's what was going on all day. So so the idea that we're trying to follow the government narrative is that's untrue to what we're doing. We're looking at evidence to try to get a coherent understanding of what's going on.
I do it because I care so about the events of 9/11, justice for people like Matt and his family and Bob McIlvain. The question is, what actually happened? And if you try to develop a lie, a fake story, a story that has no basis to it, and you try to get justice for a fake story, you might be able to hang somebody somewhere, but it's not. It's a lie building, creating another lie that is incorrect. And so what I try to do is find out what actually happened. I've studied the Pentagon most recently, but I've done papers on the Twin Towers. I can tell you that there's things being ejected out of the side of the World Trade Center 7 into Fitterman Hall. You look at the videos, some of them you can see the ejections over Fitterman Hall. I look at the details because the details tell you what happened. And if you don't know what happened, you're just shooting blind or making up stories, making up polls that don't exist and saying they're important. What's really important is, and I go tracing the details. What happened at the generator trailer? How did this happen? What are the dynamics? And what do I hear from the opponents who create distinguished people on the other side of the aisle? What do I hear? I hear a cacophony of, oh, this couldn't have happened, this couldn't have happened, this couldn't have happened, but nothing about what actually happened. I look at the details. I think it's important. If Mick, Harrison, and Barbara want to go write another pleading, they want it to be accurate and supportable by physical evidence. When you have a he said, she said, she said, never ending, you never know where the comma was, you don't know where a period goes, you don't know if when he said it was to the right, whether or not he was facing this way or the opposite way. Language doesn't work. The physical damage tells you what's going on. That's what I look at. I think it's important. And so when people say, why am I official? Because as I said earlier, this is a nothing burger, what happened. A plane hit the Pentagon. And the key questions are, who let the plane get through? Who protected the hijackers in the 28 pages? So those are the key questions that I try to address. I want this audience and the leadership to actually address. And if you try to say, well, no, it's remote control, it leads you someplace that is away from what all the other evidence is. And so I know a lot of you don't like my responses, but that's my answer.
We do have another interesting and I think important question. So why go to the trouble and take the risk of concocting a series of events that would be necessary to create the illusion of a plane crashing when on that day other planes had been used? So why go to all that trouble and take the risk? What would be the logic of faking that event as opposed to using a real passenger plane?
My position is that the plane crash was not faked. It's just that the real one was in a different position on the wall and a different time.
Okay. Yep, I'd love to dive in. I disagree with Barb on that, actually. And, I think that the last slide of my Northwoods presentation showed that there was a plan to disperse parts in the location of a feigned impact or crash. And so it's possible that I think that those parts were dispersed by some other mechanism. Why would you go to all that trouble? I think that the damage incurred by an actual 757 at that velocity would have been so systemic and massive, it potentially could have gone all the way through the B and the A ring, maybe over to the other side where leadership was. I mean, it would have been devastating. And so that might be one reason that you would want to try to contain or control the outcome of such an event.
Yeah, I agree with that. Oh, I'm sorry, Neil.
Why Pentagon is important? Because Pentagon is the soft belly of the dragon. And they did everything to divert our attention to World Trade Center. That's my opinion. They sold the World Trade Center in order to save the Pentagon. That's what I think. I do have a time to another comment also, because I wish to challenge the concept that in this case, we have to consider the whole evidence, and out from that emerge what is the most probable hypothesis. No, that's not the way science works. In science, when you come up with a hypothesis, all the evidence, all the data have to fit the model. If one single observation, one single data does not fit the model is wrong. And that's why the government has a hard time, because it's very difficult to cheat. It's much easier to tell the truth. And I just realized that in this situation, one party has actually to to prove that the airliner hit the Pentagon, and the other one to disprove it. It's much easier actually for us to disprove it because all the evidence being against it, just a single one, just a single observation is against the Boeing in the Pentagon, then it's wrong, according to the scientific method, if we want to use that. Thank you.
Craig?
Yeah, I would just want to add, in fact, this came up earlier today, private conversations there about the idea of, why wouldn't they just, and in fact, I think David mentioned it in his presentation, the question of why wouldn't they just crash a real plane? Why would they go to all the trouble of planting and concocting this whole thing? And I can certainly see that one of the reasons might be to create this debate and to keep us all busy with it. But I would say that an important thing about think about this is supposed to be a commercial airliner with passengers in it. If you crash a real plane into the Pentagon, you have no idea what's going to be the result. You might end up with a plane on the lawn completely split open. And if it's not really Flight 77, then you're going to have an empty plane, and that's going to give the whole game away. So if the intention was never to actually fly a real plane with real passengers into the building, then they would have to fake it because they couldn't take the risk that the whole thing would be given away.
So we have another question. So we understand that we could all debate all of these topics and statements, and that's what we've been doing here today, is laying out several of the key arguments for the broader audience to learn more about the internal debates and discussions over this key issue. Wayne, if you did have something to respond to, then now is the time.
Well, I want to respond to the kind of the original question and then actually to Craig's to some extent. I have created a lot of darts coming at me when I have said that that is all manual control of the planes. That's obvious. And then the pushback that I've gotten is that, what if they missed? And I say, so what? We only know the events of 9/11 that happened. Last night when we were listening to the other speakers, they were talking about going to Afghanistan and hearing about, not just planes hitting towers, but bridges being exploded and tunnels and nuclear plants being attacked and blah, blah, blah. That lots of other things were planned. We don't know what was happening. All we know was the four big events, the two Twin Towers, Pentagon and Shanksville. And by the way, there's this other thing, Building 7, that has nothing to do with any of these things, and it just kind of collapsed and no one cares, right? So it is not, in my opinion, necessary for the perpetrators to have actually succeeded in hitting the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. All they had to do was take the planes and attack America. And as you heard, the evolution of the global war on terror last night, what we saw was that it doesn't matter what the facts were. They constructed the narrative with they attacked us. Now, yes, the destruction of the Twin Towers was a horrific catalyzing event, but for being attacked by four coordinated attacks, and maybe the nuclear plants being attacked and something else would have certainly been a catalyzing impact. But we only know what happened, and we can't, I think it's a false framing to say that those were the only things and they had to happen exactly as they did. By the way, what happened to Building 7 again? It just kind of collapsed, right? And no one cared. the narrative could be spun however it wanted, and it was. Over.
Okay, excellent. And I'm glad you were able to say that, because there were so many important presentations and discussions with a lot of information last 3 days. And this leads into the premise and some of the content of this last question, which I'm going to selectively edit. So we know, and we were told insider information last night about how the Central Intelligence Agency had formulated disinformation, misinformation programs. We know that these programs exist, and there are several of them. And so part of this last question is about Operation Northwoods and the fact that there has been a detailed plan that does resemble some of the events of 9/11. And so considering Operation Northwoods, I wonder if you could provide us with some of your closing remarks with that in mind.
I'll jump in. I would say always review the raw data. When I come to analyze this stuff, I want to listen to all of CIT's statements. I want to look at all of the pictures. I want to do all of the assessments that I can. And I understand that not all of us have the time to do that, but it's really important to go to that first order data when making an interpretation. The Northwoods documents were given to us, I believe, by Providence. They were bundled into the JFK release files. I don't think that they were ever intended to really reach a wider audience, particularly at the time that they did, because they really shifted for me. We talked about paradigm, the plausibility or the possibility of just how grave things could be. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Can I just intervene? No need for closing remarks quite yet. Just respond to the issue about Northwoods, because I got a couple of questions and then we go to closing remarks. But to specific point, sort of issue and question which was raised by Richard. Yeah, well, whoever next.
Okay, Operation Northwoods. Operation Northwoods is absolutely critical. And many people don't understand the degree to which Operation Northwoods proposed plans are really a template for what happened on 9/11. It's almost as if the real perpetrators took it off the wall and dusted it off a little bit, and they tweaked it. Everything in there. They were willing to kill real people. They were willing to do terrorism against American citizens. They were, if you read that, they're not beyond anything. Okay, and I did mention that Lemnitzer, he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Lemnitzer of the Air Force. He was the mastermind behind it. And they did practice exercises of what actually happened on 9/11 in the lead up to their Sky Shield 2 exercise. They completely grounded, they used the FAA or whatever government agency was involved in to completely ground every single commercial and private plane in the entire country. And this is very important to understand. The reason they did that is that the Sky Shield 2 exercise in October 1961, it's like part of Northwoods. It's as if they took the Operation Northwoods template and they added Sky Shield 2, and it equals 2 + 2 = 4. The 4 is the 9/11 plot, okay, that was actually carried out. And most people either don't know or maybe knew and have forgotten that on 9/11, there were these interlocked exercises that were focused on defending the actual United States against an exercise by Russia, which was no longer the Soviet Union, sending their fighter jets that could have nuclear weapon bombs on them over Canada and coming over to the United States. Now, that's extremely important because that was precisely the reason they did Sky Shield 2. It was an exercise on almost precisely the same scenario of protecting the United States, in which, interestingly, Canadian planes played the red teams pretending to be the Soviet attackers of the United States. So, and how many people know that there were at least 8 war games every single day on scenarios, many of them involving hijacked airliners, even in New York City, in the whole week at least leading up to 9/11, let alone on 9/11. If I were the mastermind of this operation, I would have been the white team leader of the exercise planners, because the exercise was the modus operandi for, this is an exercise on 9/11 of the scenario of hijacking aircraft. The exercise now, that morning, started up in New York City with NORAD of crashing hijacked airliner into the Twin Towers. Now, NORAD actually claims that their response was delayed and interfered with because of the exercise. But if I wanted to pull this off, I would use the exercise as the modus operandi for planning, executing, and covering up the actual attacks.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I did a piece some time back about Operation Northwoods and how it really is kind of like a blueprint for 9/11 in many ways. One of the things that might be relevant to what we're talking about today is that part of the plan was to take a plane that supposedly, my memory serves me correctly, this plane was supposed to have medical students in it, and they were going to be flying to Dominican Republic or somewhere, I'm not sure where. And the idea was the plane was going to be shot down, it would be blamed on Cuba, and this would justify military action against Cuba. What the plan really was, though, was they were going to take off a plane with people in it. Then they were going to send up a second plane that was remote controlled, that was empty. The first plane was going to peel off, and all the people on the plane had false identities. So the plane would land, they'd all go their separate ways. And then the empty plane would be shot out of the sky over the water, and that would be blamed on Cuba and the whole thing. So in a sense, it was a faked plane crash, which I think is sort of relevant to the Pentagon. The scenario is a little bit different, but it certainly shows that they're quite willing to do something like that, where they destroy a plane or appear to destroy a plane or whatever it is, and without anybody inside actually dying. So.
Yep. So let's put this in a little, the Operation Northwards in a different context here. So as it was pointed out, it was a false flag attack, but we've got many false flags attacks, and they have resulted in wars. Okay, so anyone remember the sinking of the Lusitania? Oh, the German U-boat just kind of randomly. I think the real truth of that story is that it's a very different one, in that they were basically set up to be destroyed and blamed on the Germans, so we could enter the war on the side of the British. We've got the false flag, of course, of Tonkin Tonkin Gulf, which brought us to the Vietnam War. We've got, I had other sort, we've got Pearl Harbor, which was, it wasn't just those nasty Japanese. We were luring them into the behaviors that would lead to this event, and then let the Japanese attack proceed and interfere with the radar and all the other stuff, so they could do it. So Operation Northwoods was just one small thing, really nefarious. Thank you very much, President Kennedy, for stopping it. But the whole process is very. Is the typical. Now, the question we have on the table with 9/11 is who was actually running it. Now, if you look at Bill Binney's Thin Thread, movie is called Good American, you'll see that he was tracking who was calling who, and then he was shut down as soon as they found out about it, just before 9/11, because who was calling who meant that someone in Langley maybe was calling someone in Saudi Arabia. And while you didn't know what the conversation was, you knew who was talking to who. And that would have been a very dangerous thing. And this builds right into the Northwoods stuff, who was doing what to whom and why. And those are the questions Those are the overarching questions that have been lost by the wasted time on light poles and he said, she said, he said, she said arguments.
David, would you? I just want, okay. Okay, we're moving to the closing section. It's a couple of questions. First of all, I'd like each of you just to think about and talk through what you think are the next significant steps for your own research on this issue of the Pentagon. You've all been researching this for a long time. You have detailed understanding of various aspects of it. And yes, what are you planning to do next in terms of furthering your research on the Pentagon? And we'll start with Xander, and then we'll move along and finish with David and Wayne.
Oh, well, after this conference, I'm going to go on a really long mountain bike ride. I'm going to focus, I think, on some of the damage to the columns. I think that is a really interesting line of research that we should all be paying attention to. The remnant helical structure is something we can sink our teeth into. I think that finite element analysis will be important. I think that looking at the material properties of the materials involved are a really relevant line of inquiry. I think that will be useful. I think that we should further develop witnesses who are alive today and may be willing to come forward. We have a significant tranche of new witnesses that may be coming forward who have been inspired to tell their truth, and we need to be available to them. And with respect to specifics, actually, David, I appreciated the notion of the Cheshire cat and the grin without a cat. I too have looked at that wisp. I don't think that a turbine traveled through a tree. I think the implication potentially is that there was some sort of smoky feature along the lawn, and it's perhaps worth looking at. It doesn't really change the story in my mind, but if I were to find some free time and focus on that, maybe trying to discern what that wisp was and where it came from could be useful. And then I really think that delving into the physics of, the generator trailer movement and other features would be helpful. And I suppose I may find time to look at the light poles and write about it.
Thank you, Xander. Barbara, or I don't think Niels is currently researching. You're welcome to a couple of minutes.
Yeah. When I started out in 2006 and 2007, I was very naive at the point. I thought if I stand on a soapbox in Speaker's Corner in Regent's Park in London and just yell the truth out in the open universe, the truth would take on its life on its own, and I had nothing more to do. I was wrong. I realized over the years that it's very hard to get out, and I reached the conclusion, I don't think that 9/11 on its own can break the barrier. I think it will come together with other obvious lies, like the so-called pandemic, like Ukraine, like the climate hoax, and eventually come down in avalanche. But still, please notice 9/11 is still the big stinking elephant in the room. We can talk about the other issues I just mentioned, but 9/11 is still too hot. But it will come along, and I believe that the economics will be the big driving force, and then we'll just come along with the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Next steps in your work, Barbara.
Yeah, well, I've said it a number of times. I've spoken to an attorney who's here today, and we have agreed that we're going to move forward in FOIAing not only the Sheraton Hotel videos, but other videos and following up on the videos. I would like to just point out that I can't remember if it was Wayne or David who said, well, I just focus on the evidence. That's the problem. The government is doing very differently with the evidence at the Pentagon, whatever the truth is, than they were at the World Trade Center. They wanted you to see that second plane hit. That's why the first one hit, and there was a delay of about 15 minutes so that every camera in the world was focused on it. And so you have the video. And David, you did this magnificent analysis of the video, but you had the video to do the analysis. So we're going to get the video.
Thank you, Barbara. Craig.
Okay. Well, it's a good question, new research. That's, I guess the thing that is sort of on my mind is, I mean, I just always want to enhance my knowledge of the facts. But I think what's on my mind is reaching the wider population. And because most people don't know much about the Pentagon, they don't realize what an important part of the picture it is. And because of some of the issues that you've heard about today, a lot of people just are not willing to talk about it because they think it's too controversial, or it's like, oh, it's too, you know. So I would like to work towards making it safer to talk about this evidence and to question it, and not to sort of feel like that you're going to be sort of put down for questioning some element of the Pentagon official story. So I'd like to spread the word, so to speak. And also, I just want to make a quick, because I just believe that the Pentagon we need that as part of the story. The towers are what we focused on most of the time, but I think we need the whole story because there's so many lies in the story that the more lies that we can expose, the more that the general person out there is perhaps going to be, intrigued enough to get into it. And I just wanted to quickly throw at the end here that the Occam's razor was mentioned earlier. I don't think that was the correct use of Occam's razor. I would say Occam's razor does not work when you've got deception involved. Like, the idea that, well, if you have two competing theories, the one that makes the fewest assumptions is likely to be more likely to be correct or whatever. All that's fine, well and good, but if somebody's lying to you, I don't think Occam's razor applies.
Thank you, Craig. David.
I think most of my research is basically, it's a random walk through all the various things, and I get inspired by one thing or another, or I hear some little element, or I notice something and then start digging in, and as I dig in, things start uncovering. So there were two items that I found in the preparation for this talk that I mentioned in my talk. One was noticing that little streak of the remnant of the smoke coming from the plane as it actually went in. In other words, that streak went right into the fireball. That, for me, was a brand new insight into something that's been visible since 2002, right? I mean, and then I noticed in looking at Legacy's talking about the deflagrations and so forth, the fact that the fireball, it took 5 seconds. It was 5 seconds worth of development for that to grow. Whereas if you look at like that missile hitting the tank or the drone hitting the tank or whatever, it was boom, and it's maximum size expansion immediately. It's a supersonic expansion. So those are things that were just things that I happened upon in the process of looking for other things. And that's a lot of the way the research works for me. I don't have a plan on what to, I'm not that organized. I notice things, and when I do, I dig in, and sometimes that helps me uncover new insights. So that's just the way my brain functions.
Thank you, David. Wayne.
Where to begin? First of all, I think I'm going to continue my my legacy of being ostracized by most of the people here because data is very constraining in your stories, you can tell. The thing that's on my list to do is to follow up with Tim Michael, one of my associates from the past. He is taking the .FDR data in using ChatGPT has replicated Warren Stutz's extraction He said, well, if I ask ChatGPT, does this represent a remote control or autonomous control? And ChatGPT says no. So I don't know how this kind of fits in, but if you're asking about research. And then as far as everything else, I think I've hit the end. I don't know what else searches. I can explain everything about the Pentagon. I can explain the uplifted slab and, due to the precession of the engines. If you ever throw a football, the receiver's got to catch it, but if anyone touches it, it spirals. That's the engine tumbled and bounced. That was the last important thing that I found, with the exception of the flight data recorder. That was just kind of a recent thing. Actually, the dynamics of the impact. With the exception of the ChatGPT thing, I'm going to be just culling through my research and writing and putting it on 9/11. Speakout.org in my research collection, because I've got things about the Pentagon, the Twin Towers, the bolts breaking at the bolted connections, and Fitterman Hall, the ejection of World Trade Center from 20th floor into Fitterman Hall with the side of the building across the side of WT7 across the street. So there's many things for me to kind of document, because people don't know what I've done. They just know that I'm a nutcase when it comes to the Pentagon. And that's the life of a researcher.
Okay, thank you, Wayne. I'm not sure if any of you actually, if you want to offer some just closing comments very briefly. It feels like we're sort of wrapping things up very nicely. But before we have a few words from Richard and then from Sandra, closing comments, going back to Xander. But if people are too tired for closing comments, then I understand fully. So, okay. Well, let's just go down the line for closing comments.
Just to say that I'm grateful to be here and to be able to present. Thank you, everybody at the conference, for putting this on. And yeah, and I think I may also look at the FDR and radar data too. I'm going to add that to the mix. That's all.
Well, I'm a European, and I think this will be the time to praise the American spirit. I cannot imagine that an event like this could happen anywhere else in the world, and it makes me very confident the truth will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Barbara, closing comment.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the event. Today's been difficult, but we knew it would be. The first day we had some technical difficulties. Yesterday was magnificent. It was incredibly encouraging and incredibly motivating, and I'm not going to lose any of that. I think the big takeaway from everything that's happened today is you see the result of the government withholding such important documents, data, and videos about the Pentagon. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Craig.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm very, very grateful to be here, and I have to really tip my hats to the organizers, the organizing group, all of whom I know personally. So I have to really say they did a great job. All of you did a great job. And I'm glad to be here as one of the two, along with Niels, one of the two non-Americans on the panel. I haven't flown to the United States in a very long time, so it's really exciting to do that, and I'm glad I came. And I guess I would just conclude with this hope in terms of our ongoing work and research and all the things that we're doing is, 9/11 was a giant lie. It was a collection of of lies, thousands of them, and I would hope that we would focus, as Niels put a very important point, that, if one thing in the theory is wrong, if I interpreted this correctly, then the theory falls. If you can prove that there's some deception in the telling of a story, then you have to question the rest of the story. And so I would like to see us focus our energies on exposing the lies of the official story to the world, and maybe less of kind of reinforcing parts of that story. So thank you.
David.
I mentioned in my talk that I was actually opposed to having the third day being all about the Pentagon, because I think this is a big distraction from the emphasis. If you realize we had 2 days talking about the 9/11 event as a whole, that's where my focus is. The Pentagon is not my primary focus. It's something I've gotten into along, basically I found Wayne's material and I thought, wow, this is really insightful. And I collaborated with him to try to bring this to light. So that's where I first plugged into it. But I'm not focused really on the Pentagon. I want to see the whole 9/11 movement move forward in terms of all the good research we've done that can get derailed by getting off into fantasy theories. And I think there's a lot of fantasy theories going on here. Excuse me for throwing that in at the last minute. But I think these fantasy theories, the stuff about holograms and mini nukes and all those kind of things are fantasy theories. We need to keep our feet solidly on the ground, and that's what is going to take this movement forward. So that's where I hope, that's my closing statement, that my emphasis, I would rather have talked about the World Trade Center personally, but as far as the movement as a whole, we need to get our act together.
Thank you, David. Now, Wayne. Wayne.
Yeah, and I think I've said most everything I want to say, and I want to express my appreciation to the International Center for 9/11 Justice, all the other sponsors, the donors who made this possible. I think it was a really good opportunity. I really enjoyed the previous programs, the sessions in the event. And as far as things to go forward on, I think you all need to really focus on how did they let this stuff happen? And I think that's a key issue that has been lost. And of course, the Twin Towers is still an interesting dilemma as to what specifically happened over.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We've had a fantastic series of presentations and talks today.